All right, thanks for staying tuned. Welcome back to The Verdict here on Channels Television. We're still having this discussion with our guests both here in Lagos and in Abuja, Dr. Joe Abba, and then Mr. Mohammed Lekki of INEC, and here in Lagos, Mr. Fola Arthur Wari, and of course our own data consultant, Babajide Ogunsoro. Now, Jide, you've been quiet while this has been going on, while we've been taking the situation reports, and occasionally I see you scribble. Because we're in the process of winding down now, what is it that you're scribbling and why? What's going in your mind?
Ladi, there's something that Dr. Joe Abba said in Abuja that perhaps summarizes this entire election. He had said in 7 words that we are now used to ballot box snatching. Those were his exact words. We are used to ballot box snatching. That is the challenge we have with this country. Now, he's perhaps right, but we are used to bad roads. We are used to abnormal things. No electricity, poor hospitals. And so what it means is the student called violence is working harder than the student called peace. That is the challenge. Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called 10,000 Hours. That once you put in 10,000 hours of work in anything, you perhaps become an expert in it. And so this student called violence has put in his own 10,000 hours and is now being successful. And so violence is now more successful than peace. And that's really what's going on.
It's not an appearance.
Do we want to mask it and call it an appearance? We're looking at voter turnout. We're looking at incidences of, we are used to ballot box snatching. We're now seeing ballot box burning. Again, those 7 words, we are used to ballot box snatching. So let's not complain about ballot box snatching. What we are now seeing as a new trend is ballot box burning, and it seems to be what is disturbing us. But you know, don't worry, ballot box snatching is what we are used to. So the challenge is we need to rethink how much hard work we are putting in to ensuring we have peaceful elections. If we're getting more reports of violence, and that has been the trend for decades, then we need to rethink our electoral strategy.
But you know, Jide, I've asked this question since the beginning of election season, and I've said that we've always referenced 2011, 2015. Yes. And I asked you some time ago, what will 2019 be remembered for? When we look back on 2019 in 2023, and we're trying to reference this election season, what will we say?
We will say that people don't change their minds easily. People do not change their minds easily. We've seen that majority of those that cast their votes in this election were those that did that in 2015. But again, in the final, just as we conclude, a lot of people are still asking, what are the results going to be like from this 29 states? Again, people do not change their minds. What happened within these 29 states during the presidential election? President Buhari won 16, Atiku won 13. But again, what happened within the same 29 states in 2015? President Buhari within these same 29 states won 18. Goodluck Jonathan won 11. But here's the trick, Ijoma. Within those 18 states, President Buhari won in 2015. When the governorship elections then happened, those same states produced APC governors, all of them excluding Gombe. So people ask, we've seen these trends happen. Again, those same states that President Jonathan won, those states during the governorship election, majority of them, almost all of them, excluding Nasarawa, Plateau, and Imo State, produced PDP governors. So what we see is similar patterns 2015, 2019. So people ask, what will happen within these 29 states? The answer is simple. Majority of those states that the APC won during the presidential election, my brain tells me that majority of those states, the APC will win. And majority of those states that the PDP won during the presidential election, majority of those states, the PDP will win. Again, this election was really about people do not easily change their minds.
Is that like Sheon's prophecy, or this is just your brain telling you?
My brain tells me one thing sometimes, my heart tells me something.
Good one.
But yes. Let me bring you in here. Yes. There's something that Dr. Abba said, yes. And he said the vote buying and indeed these new manifestations of burning at continuing because the votes of the people are beginning to count. Or are counting. I think that I want to believe I heard him say that. Now, if that is the situation, should the voters stay back home? Shouldn't they be pushing forward, seeing that now that their votes are actually counting? That's why these other guys are coming out.
No, you have to determine what they are counting for. I mean, when you say the votes count
okay, should we say
who?
the votes matter?
You know, yeah, they've always mattered. But if you look at the reports of the snatching or burning and buying, it seems a bit minimal. It doesn't seem to have affected the outcome. I mean, it's not what it didn't say widespread or anything like that. But to say that vote buying indicates the growing phenomena of your vote counting is a bit counterintuitive. I don't know, because a vote should count towards a democratic end, a legitimate end. So I'm not sure that unless the proposition is that yes, the votes are more valuable to an opponent or one side or the other, that because it will assure him victory, not because it will assure the legitimacy of the process. Yes, votes are always going to be valuable anytime. But the question is under what circumstances. I would presume that only a legitimately cast vote has any value. And
so at what point would we get these votes? Because the votes are there.
Which votes?
The votes, general votes.
Okay, yeah.
At what point do we get these votes to begin to count towards a growth in the democratic process?
Look, I don't think anybody can answer that with any certainty. But what I do know is that there's no end station in democracy. It's you just have we commit to it and you keep going and hope. The ultimate reward that a citizen should expect is better and more accountable government. But this takes, you've got to raise the levels of, you've got to raise your levels of poverty, because poverty can be an incentive to sell your vote, immediate reward, as he said, as Jide said, But there's no, for me, we have to separate the ideals of democracy from the mechanisms. And it's the mechanisms that I worry about. That is the process, the management of the process. We talk about low turnout. You can't discount the fact that it's an exhausting process in Nigeria to get your PVC. It's very exhausting. And then some governor crows that, I want to commend Nigerian voters for their resilience. We like to say, well, I said that's the ability to suffer. I don't want to be resilient. I want a simple, what about disabled people? What about, we've got to make the process much more voter friendly.
Ladi has always said that he's covered so many elections and the issues seem to stay the same.
They do stay the same.
Do you think in 2023 we'll have a panel like this and we'll still be talking about logistics?
I think
ballot box.
I think we will, unless, you see, a country has to confront. Sometimes we're in denial about how bad things really are, sometimes. And as the elite rises up the economic chain, it delinks from these public services and goes to private hospitals, has people, go and collect my PVC, go and meet XYZ and tell him to give you my passport. So we delink, and then we're not really sure about how bad things are. My prayer is that between now and 2023, that all the institutions review their process, their personnel, reverse engineer, and all of that, because we haven't really fundamentally changed our approach to things. So that's my view. I know people say I'm cynical and all, but I think we can do better.
Okay. Before we get back to Mr. Lekki, let Dr. Abba please speak to us about this. You were Director General of the Bureau for Public Service Reforms, and you've been known to talk about process management, processes over and over again, needing to put the right pieces in place, get them to work together to get the ultimately desired result. If you were to advise INEC, and indeed government generally, about process management, what would you be saying to them now, vis-a-vis these elections and the next election coming, 2023?
Nelson, let me first quickly address something Mr. Athawari said, because I think he is in danger of conflating two things. The election is purely and simply popularity contest. It is not a contest of capability. It's not a contest of professionalism. It's purely and simply a popularity contest. Who will get the most votes? That's the person that wins the election. And so at a point where there's no need to go to the electorate, you could simply sit in a hotel room and write a result. You don't need the electorate for anything. And so when you think about vote buying and selling, people sell their votes for a number of reasons. People immediately claim it's poverty. Yes, I'm sure poverty has an element poverty has a role in it. At other times, it can also be a protest against the state. It's a form of protest against the state. It's saying to the politicians, I only see you once in 4 years. Every 4 years you come and promise me heaven and earth. I don't see it, so I'd rather take the money now, please. So that's another manifestation of, and so people, for that reason, you find people who are not poor actually engage in vote selling. The third is when there is no faith in the process. You know, you simply have no faith in the process. So people sell their votes for various reasons. Whether that then starts to translate to democratic benefits is a completely different matter. And it goes into the argument whether democracy itself produces development. And if you look at a number of the countries that have developed over the last 50 years or so, they have tended to develop first before getting the kind of democracy that we practice. The East Asian economies are a case in point. So is China, so is Malaysia, so is many other countries that have developed in the recent past. So some of them have had a level of dictatorship and then got to a point where they now embraced democracy. So we can get into a long debate as to whether democracy actually produces development in a particular environment. That's a completely different argument to have. But coming back to the point as to what my advice would be, I have been virtually in a minority of one of the people that argue that Nigeria's problem is planning, is not actually implementation. We say it very, very widely that our problem is implementation. Most of our problem, in my view, is actually planning. The planning is often quite weak. The planning doesn't involve the management of risks, the management of contingency. Quite often, if you ask the average Nigerian public servant, what would happen if this goes wrong? Their answer is likely to be, God will not let it happen. That's the usual answer you're likely to get. And so my advice to INEC in preparing for the next elections is basically start tomorrow. Start to do dry runs, start to simulate scenarios. I was very, very pleased, for instance, that in the presidential elections, before the postponement happened, there had been a number of cases, I think in Anambra State and one other place where INEC offices were burnt, and INEC was able to recover within, I think, like 24 to 48 hours. That was very, very impressive. We need to be able to do that at scale. We need to be able to do that in more places more quickly. And so we need to have dry runs. We need to practice over and over and over again, such that in 2023, when the next election starts, everybody can actually run the elections with their eyes closed. They've done it so many times. If you look at the way the military prepare, it will start to give you an inkling, because this is a huge logistical challenge. It's not something that civil servants will sit behind their desk and write about. You actually have to go out there and do it over and over again, introduce new challenges, introduce new contingencies. And I think it was Jide that made the point quite rightly that what we have at the moment is that the bad guys are working harder than the good guys. And we need to change that. We need to make sure that the good guys are one step ahead. We're able to anticipate the problems. We're able to plan for them. We're able to imagine all sorts of risks that can come up and prepare for them. And it's not a pleasant and sexy part of the job, actually. It's not. But it's the part of the job that the success of the elections actually hinges on. That would be my advice. There are, of course, all sorts of other issues like the size of the political parties we have and the challenges that presents. Dr. Lekki was just telling me that during the break that given the overall voter turnout in the late 30s, it actually means that we are burning 60% of our money because the electoral umpire has to prepare materials to cover everybody who's eligible to vote. Now, when only about 30-something percent actually present themselves to vote, you have to destroy 60% of the materials. That is a major problem, and that's why it's vitally important that we start to link our various databases. We start to link our voters register with our national identity card system, with our driver's licensing system, with our passport system, such that we continuously clean up the records that we have. That way, we actually have a more credible voters register. We know exactly how many people we can expect to vote. We can better plan and better prepare for them. It's also my opinion that we need to raise the threshold for political parties to be able to contest for the presidency.
I'm going to have to go to Mr. Lekki of INEC. I'm going to have to go to Mr. Lekki of INEC to give us the final words on this segment of the program. Mr. Lekki, the elections should by now be over, barring in a few areas. What should we expect going forward? You've heard what all our other guests had to say.
Well, going forward, it's a very loaded question. Going forward immediately will be to conclude this election, obviously. Because we are going through collation now, I assume that anytime from tonight through tomorrow, most of the results will be in and they'll be declared. So that is the immediate thing for this particular election. And they also look back very quickly as to areas where we could not do the election so that we don't disenfranchise and go and conclude those, because there will be some constituencies where there will be no declaration because there were no election taking place, today, in addition to the carry forward from the previous elections of national election. But going forward also, there are a lot of huge lessons that we have to learn. One is such that we must see that election in Nigeria is not an INEC thing. It's a multi-stakeholder responsibility, the media, the civil society, and many, many, many others. So we must all agree to own it and do something about it, so that we can make it definitely better. And I also want to say that I think planning is very important. I want to say, given my own study of the history of election in Nigeria and the history of INEC, this was one of the most better planned election ever. We planned very early, we released the document for planning, but beyond the planning, which I think was fairly meticulous and exhaustive, that went through stakeholder validation, we also had the issue of a lot of exogenous factors which could not have been contemplated. The fact that a number of cases clearly out of the hands of the INEC, we had to come to the wire before they were decided. Court cases that even now as we speak are impacting on the election, which are closing tonight. How do you grapple with such things? So this is to be done. We need a huge reform of the electoral process going forward, which will result in a drastic change in the way election is conducted in this country. If we are going to make the savings and get the mobilization and participation of a huge number of Nigerians. About 35% of people voted, and you can imagine the money burnt, where over 450 million ballot papers were produced for this election. Only about 35% of people voted. The rest of them will be shredded and burnt. Just imagine it. So we can't go to do business that way. So we all need to come together. We must have more reform of the electoral process and more stringent measures to ensure that we make sense out of the way we do election in this country. So this will be part of the way of going forward, beyond just the immediate need to declare the result of this election and conclude this whole process of this election for 2019, bring it to a closure, and then move forward. Then we have to grapple with the areas of that I just mentioned about massive reform of the electoral process, serious measures that need to be taken. Everybody needs to participate so that by 2023, we are doing the election in a different way, structurally, and in terms of even the methods, in terms of technology, and the method in which we do elections in this country. These are some of the ways I see, going forward.
Well,
Thank you very much.
We'll take a break at this point. I understand that we have a couple more minutes. So when we come back from that break, we would allow you drill down a little more on some of those areas. I noticed you were talking quite fast. So we'll give a couple of more minutes to do that. That's after this. All right, welcome back. The promised minutes are beginning to tick away. So, Mr. Lekki, as promised before the break, can you just give us some, apart from the ones you've talked about, the general idea that all of us are stakeholders in the project, what are some of the key areas that you would like to see these deep reforms that you mentioned? Would these include, say, voter awareness, just to take a random example?
Yes, thank you, Ladi. I think issue of voter awareness and voter participation is just too low for one to say whether or not those who actually win this election have the mandate. I mean, if you have about 35% winning the election, I mean, what about the rest of the country? What happened? So we need to question that. And I think that beyond what we do now by the media, voter education, we need to probably look at our civic, courses in secondary schools and ensure that it's a course on electoral process where people are taught this thing, maybe from secondary school down to university and stuff like that. So that would deepen that awareness, deepen the civic responsibility on Nigeria to make sure that they actually come out and participate. And we address this issue of vote buying, why not to sell your vote or not to buy it. And I think that educational process needs to come in. I also think that we need to engage with the media. Media needs to situate itself as a key stakeholder, take responsibility for certain things, maybe for once, not just to say what we say, but question things and also locate yourself as to what is my responsibility in taking this forward as media. I've not seen that clearly articulated, and that needs to be done. These are some of the areas in which each stakeholder, and many stakeholders, should begin to identify themselves and not leave it to INEC. INEC is doing far too much than it should be doing. We are supposed to prosecute, they're supposed to, register parties, which are far too many, clearly. It's too easy to register parties in Nigeria. That needs to be interrogated and maybe stopped. And even at the time we registered about 91 political parties, we have over 120 political associations waiting in the wing to be registered tomorrow. So I mean, this is sheer madness, and I think we need to, make sure that this doesn't go forward. And then even the material that we use, the technology that we use, all this needs to. I think we need to hit the ground. The whole country needs to hit the ground running to change this whole thing as a major reform of the electoral process.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Lekki. Thank you very much, Mr. Lekki. The minutes that I promised are up, actually. You've stretched beyond those. But just before we go, there's something.
Just to quickly say that we've been doing a bit of a roundup of the activities that have transpired today. Well, it was not just in Benue that recorded a bit of violence. In Enugu State, a man believed to be a supporter of one of the candidates was shot dead, and the police says it's already investigating the circumstances leading to his death. Also in Kogi State, the Commissioner of Police confirmed the death of 2 persons, while the police lost one of its men in Katsina State. And finally, in Oyo State, southwest Nigeria, a serving lawmaker at the Federal House of Representatives, Temitope Olatoye, has died from injuries sustained from gunshot wounds, which were on his way from his village in Ileshu. We do condole with those who have lost their lives during this election season.
And we have just enough time to say thank you very much to all our guests, Mr. Fola Athawari, Babajide Gustavo, Dr. Joe Abba, and Mr. Mustafa Lekki. Thank you so much for being with us this evening. And to say that It's time for us to go.
Yes, it is time for us to go. But we're still keeping our eyes on the process, and when the results are announced, when we know, you will know as well.
Indeed, the News at 10 will be coming up next, but the Verdict Studios will kick back in after the News at 10.
That's right.
All right, good night from all of us here
See you
at
later.
this time.